They read the resolution aloud, which was deliberate. Presiding Counselor Veth Ossarin could have simply logged it to the record and moved the session forward, but that wasn't the point. The point was for me to sit there in the human delegation's chair and hear every word. The Soreth Accord Permanent Assembly, in full session and by binding vote, does hereby rescind the provisional seat of the Terran diplomatic mission, seal the relevant archive under Category 4 dormant classification, and formally close the Terran matter from active consideration. The Assembly finds the mission to have failed to demonstrate the minimum threshold of strategic relevance required for continued standing. Strategic relevance. I had spent 11 years inside that chamber, and that was the phrase they settled on: strategic relevance. Veth Ossarin's secondary eyes, the pale inner pair that only opened when he was pleased with himself, were very much open. He held the pause the way speakers do when they want the room to taste the silence. Around the tiered amphitheater, 31 delegations sat in their arc. Most of them had already voted. 4 were still registering their tallies on the ledger panel beside their stations. 3 of those 4 were species that humanity had helped through the transit bottleneck at Kerv's Fold 6 years prior. I noted which 3, I noted which 4. I pushed my chair back. It made a sound. In that chamber it was the loudest thing in the room. Veth Ossarin's pale eyes tracked the movement. Ambassador Ashvith, the vote has not formally concluded. I picked up my briefcase from beside the chair. It contained a single folder of reference notes I had brought and never needed, and a thermos of cold tea I hadn't touched. I said nothing. I walked to the door opened, I left. Behind me I heard the chamber recorder announce the final tally: 28 in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 dissent. The Terran matter was closed. I did not look back. That evening I sent one message to the full Assembly record, copied to every seated delegation. 11 words. We will proceed accordingly. The archive is yours, keep it. Then I went home. The first thing I did was sleep for 3 days. The second thing I did was meet with the 5 human system governors whose transit lane authorizations ran through Kerv's Fold, and I asked them a single question: if we built our own accord, would they seat it? All 5 said yes before I finished asking. It took 8 months to draft the Kelvar Compact's founding charter. It took another 4 to bring the Doreth Collective into the room, because the Doreth had been watching the Soreth Assembly's behavior for 60 years, and were not interested in another body that operated on the same political mechanics. I spent 6 weeks with their senior mediators, going through the Compact's dispute resolution framework clause by clause. I brought nothing but the draft and 2 copies of the Soreth Assembly's own procedural record from the last decade, showing every case where the Assembly's resolution timelines had exceeded their own chartered limits. The Doreth read it. They signed. By the end of the first year, the Kelvar Compact had 7 founding signatories and administered transit authorization for 4 of the 9 major lane junctions in the sector. By the end of the third year, it had 17 signatories and 6 of the 9 junctions. Transit fees paid into the Compact's operational fund were reinvested into junction infrastructure upgrades, which attracted more traffic, which increased the fund, which allowed further upgrades. It was not a complicated mechanism. It simply required someone to do it rather than wait for the Soreth Assembly to do it for them. The Soreth Assembly did not send a message during those first 3 years, not one. In the 4th year, one of the 3 abstaining delegations, the Vareth Continuance, quietly submitted a Compact Observer Status application. They did not announce it. They sent the application directly to the Compact Secretariat, which at that time operated out of a converted cargo administration building on Kerv Station. I processed the application myself that afternoon, approved it that evening, and sent the Varath delegate a confirmation by morning. I did not send anything to the Soreth Assembly. In the 8th year, junction traffic through Compact-administered lanes exceeded traffic through the remaining 3 Soreth-controlled junctions for the first time. I was told this by our operations coordinator, who mentioned it in passing during a quarterly review. I nodded. We moved on to the infrastructure maintenance agenda. In the 14th year, the Soreth Assembly issued a formal communiqué addressed to the Kelvar Compact Secretariat, requesting a joint operations framework discussion regarding lane jurisdiction overlap in the Care Corridor. The communiqué was signed by Presiding Councillor Veth Ossarin. His pale inner eyes, I was told by the delegate who received the communiqué, were very much closed. I reviewed the request. I filed it under the Compact's standard third-tier inquiry process, which carried a 60-day response window. On day 59, I sent a reply. The Compact would be pleased to discuss jurisdiction matters in the appropriate forum, and looked forward to the Assembly's participation in the next scheduled open session review. The next scheduled open session review was 11 months away. They attended. 22 years to the day from the vote that closed the Terran archive, I walked back into the Soreth Assembly chamber. The amphitheater had been renovated. The tiered seating was the same shape, but the ledger panels had been upgraded, the lighting was cooler, and the floor seal bore the Assembly's new mark. They had changed it twice in 22 years. I knew each change meant to signal continuity. The seat at the center of the floor, the seat for the presenting party, was where it had always been. 37 delegations were present. The Assembly had added 6 since my departure. 4 of those 6 were also Kelvar Compact signatories. I sat down. I placed one document on the table in front of me. I did not open it. I did not distribute copies. I set it down so the cover page was visible to the chamber recorders, and I folded my hands over it and I waited. Presiding Councillor Yeth Voren, Veth Ossarin's successor, younger by about 2 decades, with the same secondary eye structure, but the presence of someone who had read the last 14 years of traffic reports very carefully, called the session to order. Ambassador Ashvath, the Assembly acknowledges your attendance and thanks you for accepting our invitation. We have asked you here to discuss the formalization of a working relationship between this body and the Kelvar Compact, with particular attention to the Care Corridor and the 3 remaining junctions currently under Assembly jurisdiction. I waited until he finished. Councillor, I said, before we discuss the junctions, I'd like the Assembly to review what's on the table. Yeth Voren's secondary eyes closed, I noticed, tightly flicked to the document. A recorder moved to capture its cover page. It went up on the chamber display. The cover page read, Kelvar Compact Charter of Membership and Provisional Application Register, current cycle. The register was 61 pages long. The Assembly's display rendered the index. I watched 37 delegations look at the index. I watched them locate the section marked Pending Applications, Full Membership. I watched them start reading the names. 19 of the 37 delegations seated in that chamber had submitted compact membership applications in the prior 18 months. Some had submitted quietly, through the Secretariat's standard intake process. Some had submitted through intermediaries. One had submitted 3 times under slightly different organizational names, as though the Secretariat might not notice. We had noticed. All 19 applications were listed. Every name was accurate. Every application date was logged. The chamber was very quiet. Yeth Voren said nothing for a long moment. Then, Ambassador, these are internal compact documents. They are, I said, which I am sharing here in the interest of transparency, as the Compact's charter requires in any formal jurisdiction discussion. The Assembly asked for a working relationship. I thought it was better to start from an honest picture of the current one. He looked at the document, he looked at the chamber, he looked at me. 22 years ago, I had walked out of this room with a thermos of cold tea and a briefcase of notes I didn't need. I had been very patient. We can begin with the junction framework, I said, whenever you're ready. No one in the chamber moved for a moment. That was exactly 1 beat too long. Then Yeth Vorin reached for his ledger panel, and the session began.